Red and blue lights flashed in the rearview mirror, but the arrogant officers stepping out of the cruiser had no idea they had just sealed their own fate. They thought they were profiling an easy target. Instead, they had just pulled over a federal agent with zero tolerance for dirty cops. The streets of Oakridge were slick with a cold, relentless November rain. It was a miserable night to be outside, the kind of night where the neon signs of cheap motels and liquor stores bled into the puddles on the asphalt. Behind the wheel of an unmarked, heavily tinted 2021 Dodge Charger sat Derek Stanton. At 38 years old, Derek was a seasoned Deputy U.S. Marshal attached to the Regional Fugitive Task Force. He was a man built out of granite and patience, possessing a calm, analytical mind that had kept him alive through countless high-risk warrants and undercover operations. Tonight, Derek was not interested in the local traffic. He was strictly on a surveillance detail. For 3 agonizing weeks, the task force had been hunting a high-level cartel associate known for violently silencing witnesses. Intelligence had placed the fugitive in Oakridge, a gritty, mid-sized city with a reputation for looking the other way. Derek was currently parked 2 blocks away from a suspected safe house, monitoring the perimeter, waiting for the tactical team to get into position for a pre-dawn raid. He wore faded denim jeans, dark boots, and a heavy, dark gray hooded sweatshirt. Beneath the unassuming hoodie rested his ballistic vest, his gold star badge clipped securely to his heavy leather duty belt, alongside his department-issued sidearm. Derek's attention was fixed on the encrypted radio chatter in his earpiece when he noticed the patrol cruiser slide out from a side street, its headlights sweeping across the sleek black paint of his Charger. Inside that cruiser were Oakridge police officers Brian Gallagher and Mitchell Hayes. Gallagher was a 12-year veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file was thick with excessive force complaints and racial profiling accusations that the police union had miraculously managed to sweep under the rug. He was a broad-shouldered, aggressive man with a buzz cut and a perpetual sneer. In the passenger seat sat Hayes, a relatively new officer with 3 years on the job. Hayes wasn't inherently malicious, but he was weak-willed, eager to please his senior partner, and fully indoctrinated into Gallagher's toxic brand of street justice. Inside the Dodge Charger, Derek Stanton let out a long, quiet sigh as the sudden burst of strobing red and blue lights flooded his cabin, reflecting off the rain-streaked windshield. He glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the Oakridge patrol cruiser aggressively park at a diagonal angle behind him. He hadn't committed a single traffic violation. He was legally parked on a public street. But Derek knew the harsh reality of the street, and he knew exactly what a black man sitting alone in a sleek car in a rough neighborhood looked like to an arrogant cop looking for trouble. "Command, this is Unit 4. Derek spoke calmly into his collar microphone, keeping his tone measured. "I am currently being lit up by local PD at my surveillance location. Do not break radio silence unless compromised." The task force commander's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Keep it brief, Unit 4. We move on the cartel safe house in less than 3 hours." "Copy that," Derek replied. He turned off the Charger's engine, placed the keys visibly on top of the dashboard, and rolled down all 4 heavily tinted windows. He turned on the interior dome light and placed both hands firmly at the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel. It was a textbook law enforcement de-escalation protocol designed to show approaching officers he had nothing to hide, and no hostile intent. In his side mirror, Derek watched Brian Gallagher step out into the pouring rain, his right hand resting heavy and deliberate on the grip of his holstered sidearm. Mitchell Hayes flanked the passenger side, holding a high-lumen tactical flashlight. Gallagher strode up to the driver's door, stopping just behind the B-pillar, so Derek would have to strain his neck to see him. A classic dominance tactic, designed to put the driver at a disadvantage. Gallagher slammed the blinding beam of his flashlight directly into Derek's eyes, completely ignoring the fact that the cabin light was already on. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, Derek didn't flinch, keeping his hands glued to the wheel. "Officer, before I reach for anything, I am informing you that I am an armed federal agent. I am a Deputy United States Marshal. My badge and credentials are in my left breast pocket, and my department-issued sidearm is holstered on my right hip. Gallagher's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. His deeply ingrained prejudice instantly overruled any professional training. Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Step out of the vehicle, boy, before I pull you out. Gallagher unlatched the retention hood on his holster, his face contorted in anger. Step out of the vehicle right now. Unlock the door. On the passenger side, Officer Hayes drew his sidearm, his hands shaking slightly as he aimed it through the open window directly at Derek. The situation had escalated from 0 to 100 in less than 40 seconds, driven entirely by Gallagher's unchecked aggression and prejudice. My hands are remaining on the steering wheel, Derek replied, his deep voice maintaining an eerie, terrifying calm. I was not afraid. He was furious, but he was also deeply calculating. I am going to use my left index finger to unlock the door. I am then going to step out slowly. Do not escalate this further. Derek popped the lock. Before he could even push the car door open, Gallagher yanked it wide, grabbed Derek by the shoulder of his dark gray hoodie, and violently hauled the federal agent out into the freezing rain. Derek, who weighed over 200 pounds of solid muscle, allowed himself to be moved. If he resisted or planted his feet, they would charge him with resisting arrest or use it as a fatal excuse to open fire. Gallagher slammed Derek chest first against the side of the slick black Charger. The impact knocked the breath from Derek's lungs, but he immediately spread his feet and placed his hands flat on the roof of the vehicle. Do not reach for my right hip, Derek warned loudly. Answering the patrol cruiser's dashcam microphone would pick up every single syllable. I have a loaded Glock 19. I am a United States Marshal. Shut up, Gallagher barked, kicking Derek's legs further apart, nearly dropping him to the wet asphalt. He began a rough, invasive pat-down. When his hand brushed against the hard Kydex holster on Derek's duty belt, Gallagher panicked. Gun! He's got a gun! Hayes rushed around the rear of the car, his weapon trained squarely on Derek's back. Don't move! Don't you move! I am not moving, Derek said coldly. Safely secure the weapon, then check my left breast pocket for my federal identification. Gallagher awkwardly unholstered Derek's firearm with trembling, adrenaline-fueled hands, tossing it onto the hood of the Charger. He then grabbed Derek's arms, twisting them behind his back with unnecessary, agonizing force. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the rainy night as Gallagher clamped the steel cuffs down, bone-crushingly tight into Derek's wrists. Spun around to face the two cops, Derek stared at Gallagher with unblinking eyes as rain streamed down his face. Gallagher reached into Derek's left hoodie pocket and pulled out his heavy leather credential case. He flipped it open under the glare of his tactical flashlight. There, gleaming brilliantly in the beam of light, was the heavy gold star badge of the U.S. Marshal's Service, alongside a laminated federal ID bearing Derek's stoic photograph and the Department of Justice seal. Hayes peered over Gallagher's shoulder, his face draining of all color. "Brian," Hayes stammered, his voice trembling. "Brian, that's a real federal badge. He's a marshal." Gallagher felt a cold pit of dread open in his stomach, but his fragile, bloated ego refused to process the reality. Admitting a catastrophic mistake meant ending his career on the spot. Doubling down was his only desperate, foolish attempt to retain control. "Bullshit!" Gallagher spat, snapping the wallet shut. "This is a prop. You buy this garbage online. You're a street thug impersonating a Fed." "You have crossed a line you cannot uncross, officer," Derek said quietly. "Call your watch commander. Verify the credential number. If you put me in the back of that cruiser, you are kidnapping a federal agent." "I'm arresting a gang member," Gallagher shouted, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. He shoved Derek toward the patrol car. "Get his gun and get in the car, Mitchell." Gallagher practically threw Derek into the cramped plastic back seat of the police cruiser, slamming the door shut with a heavy thud. Sitting in the dark, cramped back seat of the patrol cruiser, Derek Stanton didn't scream or thrash. Instead, a cold, dangerous stillness settled over him. He stared through the wire mesh partition at the back of Gallagher's head. He could see the tension in the officer's posture, the rapid, shallow breathing of a bully who knew, deep down, that he had just stepped into a death trap of his own making. Gallagher slammed the driver's door, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The reality was clawing at his mind. If that badge was real, his career, his freedom, and his life were over. But his unyielding arrogance and pride refused to let him confess. In his twisted mind, there was only one way out. He had to make the narrative stick. He had to make Derek look like a dangerous criminal at all costs. Gallagher turned to Hayes, his eyes wide with unhinged desperation. "Search his charger," Gallagher ordered, his voice harsh and trembling. "Find something. Drugs, illegal weapons, unregistered cash, anything." "Brian, wait," Hayes pleaded, his hands trembling. "What if he really is a U.S. Marshal? If we touch his vehicle without a warrant?" "Do what I tell you, Mitchell." Gallagher roared, "Run the search!" Hayes reluctantly walked over to the black Charger, his tactical flashlight beam shaking as he illuminated the interior. He opened the driver's door and began frantically rummaging through the glove compartment and center console. But there was nothing illegal. All he found were encrypted tactical radios, official federal surveillance logs, and spare ammunition clips clearly stamped with Department of Justice serial numbers. Hayes walked back to the cruiser, his face ghost white. "It's clean, Brian," Hayes whispered. "There's nothing in there. It's all federal gear." Gallagher's jaw clenched so hard his teeth gritted. I was cornered. In an act of pure, fatal desperation, Gallagher reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sealed plastic baggie containing a heavy chunk of white crystalline powder, confiscated evidence from a bust 3 weeks ago that he had illegally kept in his personal possession. "Look what we found under his driver's seat," Gallagher sneered, slapping the baggie onto the dashboard in front of the cruiser's dash cam. "Intent to distribute. Possession of a controlled substance. He's not a marshal, Mitchell. He's a cartel mule using a prop badge." Hayes gasped, taking a step back in pure terror. "Brian, no! You can't plant evidence on him. That's federal prison for life." "Keep your mouth shut and stick to the story," Gallagher snapped. In the back seat, Derek watched the dirty cop plant the drugs. A dark, humorless smile touched Derek's lips. Gallagher had no idea that Derek's Charger was equipped with encrypted, military-grade 360-degree internal and external surveillance cameras, recording every single second in real time. Gallagher grabbed the police radio mic, his hands trembling as he keyed the transmitter. "Dispatch, Unit 4. We have one black male in custody, heading to central booking. Charges include illegal possession of a firearm, possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, and impersonating a federal officer." The dispatcher's voice crackled back over the speaker. "Copy that, Unit 4. Logging transport at 0114 hours." Derek leaned his head back against the hard plastic partition of the back seat. A cold, dark smile touched his lips. Every single word Gallagher uttered over the recorded radio frequency was another nail in the corrupt officer's federal coffin. "You're digging your own grave, Gallagher," Derek thought silently, his wrists throbbing against the steel cuffs. "And every single shovelful is being logged on recorded federal channels." While Gallagher threw the patrol cruiser into drive and accelerated toward downtown Oakridge, pure chaos was erupting 3 miles away, inside the Regional Fugitive Task Force Mobile Command Center. Commander John Bradley, a grizzled 30-year veteran of federal law enforcement with a zero-tolerance policy for incompetence, stood over the main tactical display console inside an unmarked black RV. His sharp eyes narrowed as he noticed Derek's icon flashing red on the satellite tracking grid. "Why has Stanton been off comms for 15 minutes?" Bradley demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. He was supposed to give a final perimeter check before the entry team moved on the cartel safehouse. "Sir, Unit 4 reported being lit up by local PD 20 minutes ago." The tactical communications specialist replied, frantically tapping at her console. He said he would handle it and maintain radio silence. but his Charger GPS shows his car is stationary while his personal vest tracker is moving toward the Oakridge police department. Bradley's blood ran cold. Hack the Oakridge dispatch feed immediately. 5 seconds later, Gallagher's radio transmission played through the command center speakers. They listened in utter disbelief as Gallagher reported arresting a black male carrying a prop badge and illegal drugs. Commander Bradley's face contorted in pure, lethal fury. They arrested my lead surveillance operative during an active cartel hunt. Bradley slammed his heavy fist onto the console, shaking the monitors. Abort the cartel raid. All units, gear up. Full tactical rollout to Oakridge Central booking right now. Nobody touches my marshals. The harsh fluorescent lights of Oakridge Central booking buzzed with an incessant mechanical hum. The air in the processing area was a stale mixture of cheap industrial floor wax, old sweat, and the palpable desperation of Saturday night offenders. Officer Brian Gallagher marched through the heavy double doors, his chest puffed out with unearned pride, his hand firmly gripping the bicep of Deputy U.S. Marshal Derek Stanton. Officer Mitchell Hayes trailed a few paces behind, looking pale and thoroughly nauseated by the entire situation. Derek walked in complete silence, his dark hoodie soaked through, clinging to the Kevlar vest underneath. His wrists throbbed from the over-tightened steel cuffs, but he refused to give Gallagher the satisfaction of a grimace. He simply observed the room, his trained eyes scanning the exits, the security cameras, and the tired-looking desk sergeant sitting behind a high, bullet-resistant glass partition. Sergeant William Miller was a 25-year veteran of the Oakridge Police Department. He had seen every flavor of criminal, every species of rookie mistake, and every arrogant hothead that had ever pinned on a badge. He looked up from his paperwork as Gallagher hauled Derek toward the intake counter. "Look what we pulled off the streets tonight, Sarge," Gallagher announced, his voice booming across the bleak room. "Caught this guy lurking in the East End with an unregistered firearm, ghost plates, and a baggie of narcotics under the driver's seat. Tried to tell me he was a federal agent. Even had a fake badge to go with it." Sergeant Miller narrowed his eyes, adjusting his reading glasses as he scrutinized the soaking wet, broad-shouldered man standing before him. Miller's gaze traveled over Derek's calm demeanor, the tactical boots, the distinct imprint of body armor, and finally settled on the steady, unblinking eyes of the suspect. Miller had arrested hundreds of gangbangers and impersonators in his career. None of them looked like this. None of them possessed the terrifying coiled stillness of the man currently standing in his booking area. "Fake badge, you say?" Miller asked slowly, holding out his hand. "Let me see the evidence, Gallagher." Gallagher proudly tossed Derek's leather credential case through the pass-through slot under the glass. Miller picked it up. He flipped it open. The moment his thumb brushed the heavy, deeply engraved gold star, a cold shiver ran down the older sergeant's spine. Fake badges were usually lightweight, made of cheap pot metal with generic lettering. This badge possessed a distinct, undeniable gravity. Miller looked at the laminated identification card. The watermarks were flawless. The holographic Department of Justice seal shifted under the fluorescent lights. Miller swallowed hard, a sudden dryness coating his throat. He turned to his terminal, opened the National Crime Information Center database, and typed in the name. Stanton. Derek. He added the unique identification number printed on the credential card and hit enter. For 3 agonizing seconds, the system processed the query. Then the screen flashed violently with a bright red banner. It wasn't a standard return. It was a Priority 1 Federal Restricted Access notification. A secondary window popped up, accompanied by an ear-piercing electronic beep that echoed through the booking area. Warning: subject is an active duty deputy, United States Marshal. High-level security clearance. IF detained. Contact Regional Command immediately. Sergeant Miller felt the blood drain completely from his face. He looked from the computer screen to Gallagher, who was still smirking, and then to Derek, who was staring right back at the sergeant with eyes as cold as a winter grave. "Gallagher," Miller said, his voice dropping to a harsh, trembling whisper. "Take those cuffs off him. Right now. Gallagher's face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He violently shoved Sergeant Miller back against the bulletproof glass partition. "Are you out of your mind, Sarge? It's a fake. It's a high-tech prop. He had a baggie of ice under his seat. We stick to the story, we log the evidence, and we lock his black ass in a cell." "Don't touch me, Gallagher," Miller shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he pointed a shaking finger at the red flashing computer monitor. "You complete idiot, NCIC Priority 1 flags don't trigger for prop badges. That is a live Department of Justice federal alert. You just brought an active Deputy U.S. Marshal into my booking room in cuffs." Derek stood in the center of the room, his dark hoodie dripping rainwater onto the linoleum floor. Despite his throbbing wrists and the steel cuffs biting viciously into his skin, his posture remained imposing, built out of granite and iron discipline. He looked down at Gallagher with icy, unblinking authority. "Every second you leave these cuffs on me, Officer Gallagher, you are adding consecutive years to your federal prison sentence," Derek said, his voice ringing through the silent booking area like a death knell. "You are currently committing the ongoing felony kidnapping of a federal law enforcement officer under color of law. Your cruiser's dash cam recorded you planting evidence. My vehicle's internal encrypted telemetry recorded your faces. It's over." Hayes collapsed to his knees right there on the cold tile, burying his face in his hands. "I told you, Brian," Hayes sobbed hysterically. "I told you to check the ID. We're ruined. We're going to federal penitentiary for life." "Shut up, Mitchell," Gallagher screamed, pulling his taser with a trembling hand, completely unspooling into full psychological breakdown. "Nobody moves. I control this scene. He's a suspect." Before Gallagher could aim the weapon, the heavy double steel doors of the booking facility didn't just open. They exploded inward off their hinges with a deafening crash. A heavily armed 8-man tactical stack from the Regional Fugitive Task Force flooded into central booking. Clad in dark assault gear with gleaming gold, U.S. Marshal patches across their vests, suppressed rifles swept the room. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Get on the ground now!" Commander Bradley's voice bellowed like thunder. The tactical team moved with terrifying, practiced precision, sweeping the booking area with laser-focused rifles. Red dots danced across Gallagher's chest, pinning him against the intake counter. The air in the room grew heavy with absolute lethal force. Gallagher's fingers trembled violently against the grip of his taser before it clattered uselessly onto the linoleum floor. The sheer weight of federal authority had descended upon Oakridge Central Booking, shattering his delusional grip on power in an instant. Commander John Bradley stalked forward, his eyes burning with righteous fury. He bypassed the terrified local officers, stepping directly up to Derek Stanton. Pulling a universal handcuff key from his vest, Bradley unlocked the steel bracelets biting into Derek's wrists. Derek rubbed his raw, bleeding skin, his face remaining a calm, unreadable mask. He calmly picked up his leather credential case from the intake desk, slipping it back into his inner breast pocket. "Are you all right, Deputy?" Bradley asked, his voice low and tight. "I'm intact, Commander," Derek replied, his deep voice slicing through the tense silence. "But these officers have crossed a line from which there is no return. Under color of law, they illegally detained a federal agent, fabricated evidence, and attempted to frame me." Bradley turned his fierce gaze onto Gallagher, who was cowering against the wall, his bravado entirely stripped away, leaving only a sniveling, desperate bully. "Officer Brian Gallagher," Bradley announced formally, his voice echoing off the concrete walls like a judge delivering a sentence. "You are under arrest by the United States Marshal Service." Two heavily armed tactical operators stepped forward, grabbing Gallagher by the arms and spinning him around with brutal efficiency. They picked up the very same steel handcuffs Gallagher had clamped onto Derek less than an hour ago and violently ratcheted them onto Gallagher's wrists. "You are facing federal charges under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1201, for kidnapping a federal official. Section 242 for deprivation of civil rights under color of law. and Section 111 for assaulting and impeding a federal officer," Bradley stated coldly. "You are facing up to 25 years in a federal penitentiary." Officer Brian Gallagher's face crumpled in absolute, sniveling terror as the cold steel of his own handcuffs ratcheted down onto his wrists. The arrogant, untouchable bully who had ruled the streets of Oakridge with an iron fist and a dirty badge was suddenly stripped of every ounce of power he possessed. "Wait, please," Gallagher begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper as the tactical agents hauled him off his feet. "It was a mistake. It was dark. He matched a description of a dangerous suspect. Hayes, tell them it was an honest mistake." Gallagher turned his wide, bloodshot eyes toward his young partner, desperately pleading for a lifeline. But Officer Mitchell Hayes, still kneeling on the cold tile floor with his hands behind his head, didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. "I told him to stop," Hayes cried out frantically to Commander Bradley, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate bid to save his own skin. "I told him to verify the credentials. I wouldn't listen. He took drugs out of his own jacket and planted them on the dashboard. I didn't want any part of it. I'll testify to everything. I'll cooperate." Gallagher let out a choked gasp of betrayal as he realized his partner had flipped on him in less than 10 seconds. The narrative he had tried so desperately to construct had completely shattered. The federal operators dragged Gallagher backward through the double steel doors of central booking. His walk of shame was absolute and brutal. I was parroted past dozens of stunned Oakridge police officers, desk clerks, and booking deputies who watched in utter silence as their most notorious senior officer was marched out in cuffs by federal assault team. Outside in the pouring rain, Gallagher was unceremoniously shoved into the back of the very same unmarked black tactical SUV that had led the convoy. Sitting in the dark cabin, staring through the rain-streaked window at his own precinct, the horrifying reality of his future finally settled over him. The aftermath of that rainy November night was swift, brutal, and historic. True to his word, Officer Mitchell Hayes accepted a full plea agreement with the Department of Justice, providing exhaustive testimony detailing not only Officer Brian Gallagher's actions that night, but a multi-year pattern of civil rights abuses, evidence planting, and systemic racial profiling orchestrated by Gallagher and routinely ignored by his superiors. Brian Gallagher was denied bail, deemed an extreme flight risk and an ongoing danger to the community. During his federal trial, the prosecution presented unassailable evidence, the military-grade 360-degree footage from Derek's unmarked Charger, the cruiser's dashcam recording showing Gallagher planting narcotics on the dashboard, and the crisp audio from central booking, where Gallagher attempted to enforce a false narrative against a federal officer. It took the federal jury less than 90 minutes to return a guilty verdict on all counts. The arrogant cop who once believed he owned the streets of Oakridge was sentenced to 18 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his pension, his badge, and his freedom. The Oakridge Police Department did not escape the blast radius. The Department of Justice launched a massive civil rights investigation that resulted in the termination of the precinct captain, the forced retirement of a dozen complicit officers, and a sweeping federal consent decree, placing the entire police department under strict, uncompromising federal oversight for the next decade. As for Deputy U.S. Marshal Derek Stanton, he barely took 2 days off. 48 hours after his wrists were freed, Derek was back behind the wheel of his black Dodge Charger, his wrists wrapped in light bandages beneath his hoodie. He returned to the exact same surveillance position in Oakridge, watching the cartel safe house. When the high-level fugitive finally emerged at 0300 hours, Derek led the entry team with absolute precision, placing the cartel operative in cuffs without a single shot fired. For Derek, the star badge on his belt was never a weapon of authority to abuse. It was a sacred promise of justice that no corrupt officer could ever tarnish.